Welcome to Live, Life Inspired Views for Every Day. My name is Chris Meyer, and I'm a curious soul. Garrison Keeler of the radio show Prairie Home Companion now writes a regular column called Garrison Keeler and Friends. Last week, he shared about a recent performance that he had in Atlanta. The next morning in the hotel, a woman struck up a conversation with him at breakfast. Keeler said that he rarely gets to have any in depth kind of exchange with those who come to his performances, but this woman, who had seen him perform the previous evening, was sitting in the hotel breakfast suite and kindly thanked him. They began a conversation that included how she came to her career in math and her feelings about the election results. The conversation was intriguing and meaningful. Later, he had another conversation with a woman who homeschooled her children so that she could have more influence about the amount of screen time they were exposed to in their young lives. Keeler said, "It was a genuine encounter, sitting at a table, drinking coffee. The first woman apologized for bothering me, but the conversation was no bother." And Keeler went on to say, "I'm grateful that as a kid I got to experience visiting when the family got in the car and dropped in on someone's house and sat around and visited. We kids, we sat quietly and listened to the elders reminisce about their childhoods, which could be a true revelation hearing the different versions of history." Hmm. Keeler's column reminded me of those days when people seemed to do more visiting. I remember those days too when we would go along and drop in on people to visit. That was the way people kept a conversation going prior to the invention of email and cell phones. Now, cell phones are used more for scrolling and texting than for conversation. Visiting is free, leaves no stain or mess, needs no preparation, and is there for pure joy and connection. Of course, information is always exchanged in some ways and often may be referred to as gossip, good and sometimes not so good gossip. Feelings can be ruffled and hurt, but visiting most often builds bridges of relationships, brings people together in community, allows others to be seen and heard, and almost always bestows a sense of belonging to a group. Remember the proverbial water cooler at someone's work? The water cooler stood as a symbol of workplace visiting. With so many people working from home since COVID, the visiting around casual, mundane, or other topics is no longer there, no longer connecting people. Remember the sitcom Seinfeld? It was made to describe a show about nothing, most often focusing on the minutiae of daily life. The funny thing is that people flocked to it. Why? Did it remind them of their lives? It was about nothing. And yet it entertained us, and the phrases and episode antics and the characters have stayed alive in our memories and conversations for many years since it ended. It wasn't about nothing. It was about life, about us. That is what visiting is about. It is about our lives. It is about us. Remember Nelson Mandela's quote from last week's podcast? The best weapon is to sit down and talk about it. We need to keep the art of conversation, the ability to visit oiled and in shape. Someone said, "Do more things that make you forget to check your phone." I love that. I meet with my exchange club every Wednesday. After the meeting, the women have a tradition of staying and sharing a glass of wine together. Over the next hour, we talk about a plethora of topics, and no one ever even thinks of scrolling or checking their phones. My dear friend Ross Sutter has such a handle on visiting with anyone. He makes me laugh, inspired, and motivated all in one conversation. He self admits that his conversations run like Mark Twain's sketch on his grandfather's ram. Perhaps that is where the word ramble comes from. Anyway, in that sketch, Mark Twain, which you can hear Holbrook do on YouTube, begins by introducing something that happened between his grandfather and his grandfather's ram. Twain soon runs off topic and down a rabbit hole about someone watching the incident whose name he forgets, but then remembers something about his background that leads to another topic and around this woman who has a glass eye that didn't fit. I don't think Twain ever came back to conclude what happened to his grandfather's ram, but you get the idea. In visiting with Ross, You can go around the whole world and become acquainted with the most interesting people all in one initial comment at the beginning of the conversation. But that is the art and beauty of visiting. It's different from a focused conversation at a meeting or in a class. Visiting begins when we breathe life into it with a few interesting anecdotes. It can bring us interesting information and a closer connection to those within the conversation. Visiting is about relationships. Now think about the people you love to visit with the most. They have something that draws you in. Someone said, be such a beautiful soul that people crave your vibes. One becomes that beautiful soul by seeing the other instead of seeking to be seen. So be curious about others. Listen without thinking what you want to say next, and create a soothing place for conversation. This week, on your bathroom mirror, tape a blank piece of paper and then write who you have visited with each day. Join me next Monday for Live, life inspired views for every day. I'm Chris Meyer, and I'm a curious soul.